Europe's race to secure critical raw materials is accelerating. From the minerals that power clean energy and semiconductors to the metals that underpin defense and mobility, the challenge extends beyond extraction. It's about innovation, circularity, and resilience.
Across the continent, new projects and technologies are redefining how resources are explored, processed, and recovered. Breakthrough initiatives like Spain's Iberian Belt West and the Bloom project are advancing sustainable exploration and smart processing, while circular economy models are reshaping the very foundations of mining.
Metals such as magnesium and copper are taking center stage as Europe strengthens its strategic autonomy and builds resilient, low-impact supply chains.
This is the future of raw materials in Europe, connected, competitive, and sustainable from mine to market.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Martina Bassan, Head of Communications at Eurometal, European Associations of Metals. I hope you've been enjoying some very interesting sessions so far here at MINEX Europe. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one as well, which I'm delighted to moderate, and which delve into Europe's raw materials needs for primary and secondary sources. Just yesterday, the European Commission put forward the idea of a critical raw materials center to monitor, jointly purchase, and stockpile critical raw minerals in order to ensure that the EU industry sector, such as the clean tech, digital, automotive, space, and defense, have sufficient and timely supplies. This proposal comes as a part of the European Commission's plan to diversify supply of minerals away from China, but also as a strategy to secure Europe's independence and strategic autonomy. It builds upon previous key EU initiatives, such as the Clean Industrial Deal, the Critical Raw Materials Act, and the Steel Metals and Action Plan aimed at enhancing competitiveness, addressing supply vulnerabilities, and promoting circularity in the Europe mining and metal industry. 2024, with the Critical Raw Materials Act and the Draghi report in particular, have been a turning point in the European approach, reflecting a growing recognition among policy stakeholders and policymakers of the necessity to increase domestic production in a responsible way. By linking critical raw material issue to other strategic objectives such as decarbonization, digital transition, defense, and industrial policy, critical raw materials have since then been framed as a resource issue as well as a strategic choke point for Europe's future industrial strength. Today's panel will address the following questions. How can Europe stay on track with the targets, the vision, the approach set by the European Commission? What is currently done to make sure that we are achieving the goals set by the Critical Raw Materials Act and meet Europe's raw material needs? How and to what extent emerging technologies and technological innovation can help alleviate supply risk and reconcile resource security with environmental protection? The presentation you're going to hear will examine how we are progressing to that objective, and during the next couple of hours, we will discuss together with our speakers initiatives and challenges for the sectors, what can be done to strengthen domestic value chains for critical raw materials, as well as the needs and solutions, looking forward to the future we aspire to build with the metals and minerals lying beneath the earth, a low-carbon, equitable, and resilient one. With no further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Alena Kuczko. Alena Kuczko is Executive Director at GlobeSec US Foundation. Her current research focuses on transatlantic relations, particularly emerging technologies, semiconductors, critical raw materials, energy transition, defense, and security. Alena has over a decade of experience in the sector and in building public-private partnerships that connect industry leaders, investors, and policymakers. Her presentation will focus on how to bridge the gap for key critical raw materials by 2030, while meeting local demand in critical raw materials and taking into account the effects on cost and sustainability. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martina, and thank you so much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will be looking at demand and supply projections on the timeline until 2030 in Europe, and I'll throw in some data for North America as well for comparison. And specifically, I'll have a look at what can be done to fill these gaps, specifically by deploying some new technologies and more innovative approaches. We, on purpose, look at the 5-year timeline. We spend a lot of time talking to politicians, investors, and industries, and especially on the government and investor side, there is often some paralysis when people start thinking about projects with a very long lead time. So we thought it could be helpful to look what can be done in the more immediate timeline, and it also helps in our conversations to focus where exactly Europeans on the government side, on the investment side, can focus their efforts and where more investments and action can be channeled. So I'll reiterate very briefly what has been discussed many times before during this conference. Global demand for critical raw materials is projected to remain resilient. Global supply will be gradually catching up, but supply and supply chains for the upcoming years will be very concentrated in the hands of a few countries. So that puts Europe in a pretty precarious position. Let's have a look now at the demand and supply specifically in Europe. What we see for numbers in Europe for the upcoming 5 years is that demand will continue to go up. It's driven by the uptick in local manufacturing, in industrial capacity, electrification, energy transition, data centers rollout, and defense build-out. If we look at the supply side, though, and if we look at the baseline scenario of the current trajectory, European but also North American supply is very unlikely to keep up with this growing demand. There will be significant gaps between what Europe needs and what Europe can produce domestically. According to our calculations, in Europe will only be covered from domestic sources around 20% of our needs. Given that there is, of course, a lot of investments needed in the long-term projects, we had a look at what levers we can deploy in the more short timeline on the demand and supply side that could make the difference. We identified 3 levers on the supply side and on the demand side and tried to calculate how much boost they can give to the local supply in Europe. On the supply side, lever number 1 is pretty straightforward. It's actually converting new and expanded sites. A lot of projects go off schedule, but if we just convert what's already in the pipeline, we can be in a much better situation. For example, for lithium, we can get 25% of European demand covered from domestic sources. Or, for example, for synthetic graphites, we can also cover about 20% of the local demand. Lever number 2 is primary supply innovation. Here we're looking at categories like improving mining material yield through AI-enabled process optimization. We look at innovative chemical processes like direct lithium extraction or at recovery of metals from overlooked waste resources such as mining tailings. For example, with tailings, of course, quite some technologies having trouble with working with low-grade ores and complex geologies, but there are quite a lot newer technologies that are already maturing and being tested commercially that can help significantly. That includes hydrometallurgical leaching processes, specifically catalytic leaching or glycine leaching, that can help significantly. Specifically, for example, for copper, we can meet about 2-3% of additional forecasted demand in Europe, and about additional 4% of lithium demand in Europe can also be done if we deploy these methods as well. Quite a lot of projects are already online that are testing AI-driven system optimization. We looked at various processes across the grinding, flotation, and leaching processes that involve preliminary testing, and we already seen the numbers that this deployment can increase the local supply by about 2-4%. And finally, level number 3 is recycling. Battery market is expected to almost triple by 2030. about 30% of the global end-of-life battery supply will be coming from Europe and North America. So there's a huge battery volume available for recycle in the upcoming 5 years. Of course, there are still a lot of problems with Europe with scaling, shredding, or processing capacities. Quite a lot of projects were put on pause. If we manage to fix this problem and double down on battery recycling, we can get additional supplies in the amount of 7-9% of total demand in Europe for materials like lithium and nickel. Now, very briefly, of course, the natural question is, what about cost, competitiveness, environmental impact of these technologies? As you can see, there is a lot of green on the environmental side, which means these technologies are typically more environmentally friendly and sustainable than currently more popular alternatives. On the cost competitive side, some of these technologies are still maturing, so it's a bit premature to say whether they can be cost competitive specifically in the European context. For example, direct lithium extraction is still not cost competitive, and battery recycling can be a bit more competitive, but so far not yet, especially in competition with the Asian players. Now, going to the demand side, we also had a look at 3 levers that could be helpful in actually reducing the demand for critical raw materials in Europe. Lever number 1 is technology mix shift. Adopting alternative technologies, for example, in battery chemistries, like sodium-ion batteries, can help a lot reduce demand for some of the critical materials. Currently, 2 types of lithium-ion batteries are dominating the market, but there are already technologies that are going online that are trying to test new battery mix. Specifically, I'll pause here on sodium-ion penetration as what we see as the most maturing technology. According to our projections, sodium-ion batteries could capture about 6 to 20% of the battery market by 2035. And if Europe doubles down on this technology right now, it can reduce its domestic demand for lithium, graphite, and copper by about 10%, an additional 3 to 6% for manganese. Lever number 2 is material substitution. Quite a lot of companies are already trying to find alternatives to rare earth element-based electric motors and trying to see whether there can be other materials that help design alternative motor technologies. Such innovations already being tested, and they can reduce demand by rare earth minerals by about 20% in Europe, which can be significant given Europe's almost total reliance on the imports in this category. And final category, of course, is efficiency improvements. There are technologies that allow to substitute some materials and improve efficiencies without actually losing performance. For example, specifically, we identified silicon blending in battery anodes as the technology that helped reduce the demand for graphite by about 20%. And similar question is, what about cost competitiveness and environmental impact? All of these technologies are still at the early maturation stage, and more time is needed to fully assess their cost competitiveness and impact on the environment. But in some cases, we already see the positive trajectory. For example, for material substitution and efficiency improvements, cost effect is showing to be positive. To sum up, there is a beautiful graph for you where you can see that if we add up all the innovation levers to the baseline scenario, we can actually close a pretty meaningful share of the local demand in Europe. And just for comparison, if we do the same in North America, Americans and Canadians can be pretty much almost fully independent and rely on domestic sources only for the materials that we looked at. So, in summary, given Europe's strong demand for better materials, adopting new battery technologies could make some of the most significant differences in Europe's reliance on and lack of critical raw material supply. Material substitution and efficiency improvements can also make sufficient contributions. But as a reminder, again, adoption of all these technologies will depend largely on their successful commercialization. And the final note is that, sadly, all these technologies are not going to come online if there is no additional action taken. And there's quite a few enablers that will need to be put in place to make this reality possible. These enablers will have to be carried out by a variety of actors. Those include, of course, governments, investors, research institutions, companies in the mining sectors, but also consumers of the critical raw materials. And some of the key enablers that would be important, and again, some of them were very nicely discussed in the previous session. Of course, the development of local downstream industry would be critically important. Especially if we're talking about battery or semiconductor manufacturing, because these industries could ensure offtake and guarantee buyers for locally produced materials. We need to make sure that there is stable policy environment, which includes more predictability and shorter timeline on effective permitting processes. And finally, that would really help to incentivize participation in the R&D players, and financial incentives can happen in various forms, both in the shape of direct financing, but also in the form of tax rebates, grants, or other private schemes. And I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this inspiring presentation on innovation-driven ways to close the supply gap. We can move on now to the next speaker, Wen Yuang. She is a strategic advisor specialized in the commercial, economic, financial, technical, and regulatory dimension of the energy and digital transitions. Executive lead on critical minerals at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. She focused on collaborative projects, and she will deliver now a presentation on how to improve circularity across critical raw material value chain. Wen, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I hope your mid-morning caffeine has kicked in. If not, grab a little bit more. I think Elena touched on a lot of things I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to jump through some of these graphs pretty quickly because it pretty much communicates the same messages. And I think instead what I hope to do today is, first and foremost, if you haven't heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that makes a lot of sense. Because before this year, we have been tiptoeing around how we engage with extractive industries. And this year is when, through our new strategy, a lot of the ways we think about circular economy and how we engage with mining industry and its stakeholders has changed. And so I want to give a bit of an introduction to the kind of things that we're doing, in case it is of interest to you, and really maybe pitch a little bit of a vision, because 10 minutes is very short. So hopefully this will be a bit of a foot in the door for you to speak to me a little later. But I promise this will be a very short introduction just to keep my boss happy. But what is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation? We were set up 15 years ago because we have this belief, I say we, I wasn't there at that time, but we had this belief that almost anything in the world that you use can be transferred from a linear economy to a circular economy. And pretty much everyone goes, oh, you mean doing more recycling? No, it is recycling and many other forms of business, technology, and regulatory intervention as well. And what we always try to do is to lead, as you can see with the first bullet point, that the circular economy is a fantastic business opportunity, that there's often a very strong business case given the right regulatory environment and socioeconomic environment for circular economy. And I think part of this entire panel is about that. Why are we talking about critical minerals and critical raw materials in Europe today? Well, because we realize that there is a rapidly increasing demand for these materials, and that maybe perhaps secondary and circular supply can play a huge role in terms of meeting society's needs. So we are currently focusing on 3 areas. I lead globally our work on critical minerals. We work on critical raw materials as well. They're not synonymous, but by and large we do both. And one of my colleagues lead our work on plastics and packaging, a big team. We were behind the Global Plastics Treaty that didn't pass, but really, really pushed a lot of the conversation forward. And the other team that you can find in Ellen MacArthur Foundation is working on retail business models. So, you would have heard a lot of this from the previous presentation already, but the top line is Europe wants material security and energy security, but it also wants energy security, and it also wants to tackle climate change. Fundamentally, these are all individually already pretty demanding policy goals. And on top of that, if you really want to tackle climate change, if you really want energy transition, the implication of that, as you would have heard yesterday, today, and for the rest of the day, is that it's going to be not just a transition away from fossil fuels, but a fundamental mineralization that needs to happen in our economy. And the purpose of this slide is to say, not only is it going to happen, we know that, but it's going to happen extremely, extremely quickly. That's just taking the energy transition story. Now, if you take what's happening on the digital side, with what I can see right now, almost everyone in this room has a smartphone, and all of you probably at some point use AI to write your LinkedIn post or to that email to your colleagues as a first draft, right? What we know is the digital economy is also going to demand exponential increase in critical minerals as well, to power the digital infrastructure, to power the energy, to power the digital infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So just on the energy side, there's going to be a dramatic increase, but I also want to make a small case here that it is also about the digital transition as well. Elena touched on this. We know there's going to be an incredible demand and supply gap in a lot of the critical minerals relevant to the energy and digital transition. But one of the things I want to highlight here is if you use a baseline assumption of the level of secondary supply we can get from existing technologies, existing business models, and adjacent technologies and business models, even that would not be enough to meet the total supply that you need. So the question isn't, is circular economy a good idea? Is it good for Europe, for material and energy security? It's pretty much the case that you need a circular economy for critical minerals and critical raw materials, period. It is required if we want to continue to enjoy the benefits of tackling climate change and renewable energy and electric vehicle batteries. It is also required if we want to live the life that we live today and want other people to live the life that we live today with the benefits of digital technologies. So some of the things that we look at, because I think a lot of people talk about recycling, that is of course one of the massive levers, but if you take just batteries or consumer electronics, for example, some of the things that we're working on with our partners, anywhere from OEMs like JLR, Renault, Audi, Volvo, to battery manufacturers, CATL, the Chinese battery manufacturer, is our leading strategic partner, to technology companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple. Some of the things we work is also around, for example, design, which include things like, for example, designing for disassembly a lot better. But a lot of times you may think, I think to this room, that this is a conversation that happens sort of mid-downstream. But actually, when we go into these conversations, a lot of these people want to engage with more upstream stakeholders. The other interesting thing about design is we try to look at design from a system perspective of bringing the entire value chain together to figure out what are the things that should be standardized and what are the things that we innovate on top. Now, we've been very good at talking about these things with the manufacturer of phones or manufacturers of cars. We haven't really been as good, and this is our ambition, to move upstream into the production and mining and refining industry. But just to give you a quick example, if I ask you to show your phone, almost everyone's phone looks like some version of this. Unless you're a hardcore BlackBerry fan and you still have one of those. But pretty much everyone, your phone has a very common form factor. How do they compete? They compete on other things, right? Phone manufacturers compete on other things. They compete on software, they compete on style, but pretty much you have very similar form factors. And as a result, we can say, well, one of the best things to accelerate repair, remanufacturing, recycling is if we can get technology companies to start to standardize some of these components inside, that will make it exponentially easier to recycle. So a lot of times, our work as Ellen MacArthur Foundation is bringing businesses together, not just businesses in a vertical, but businesses across the value chain. So I'll give you another example, which is the last row here, innovative business models. I think for the longest time, the industry believes that if you buy a car, you own the car, and that is still the case for 99% of the passenger cars that you buy. But increasingly, we realize for both business purposes and circularity benefits, you can have innovative business models like battery swapping, which we're working on, which means you make the battery last longer because the ownership of a battery maybe lies, for example, in the stations that does the battery swapping. Or you can have battery as a service, which means the original battery manufacturer is now incentivized to maximize the lifetime of the battery by managing the charging and discharging well, by making the battery easier to repair, and so on and so forth. So what we know is if we can bring people across the value chain, you can create innovative business models where previously someone who was your supplier can be a partner, and someone who's your customer can be your investor or a partner. And those are the kind of forum that we create in order to accelerate circular economy across the value chain for critical minerals. Happy to talk about this a bit more. I'm running out of time, so I just want to stop with sort of what is the most relevant to people in this room. So at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for Critical Minerals, we're starting with looking across the entire value chain of stakeholders, from mining and refining to manufacturing to distribution to retail to recycling, end of life, second life, and so on and so forth. And we're looking at it across energy transition and digital transition. Under energy transition, we have a program that works on EV batteries, including engaging with upstream miners and refiners to bring them across to have conversations in the same room with the battery manufacturers, with the OEMs, to figure out how we can accelerate circular economy across the value chain. On the digital transition side, very much the same story, but starting with consumer electronics. So that's it for my time. Thank you for your interest, and very happy to discuss with anyone who's interested in being part of the mission. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Wen Yuan. Perfect timing. We can move to the next speaker, Fernando Acosta. Fernando is Director of Economics and Environment in the International Copper Study Group. He is industrial and mining engineer with a long career spanning technical operations, project finance and evaluation, investment analysis, and strategic consulting. His presentation will focus on copper, on recycling copper, global trends, and the future of a circular industry. Please join me in welcome Fernando.
Hello, good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this timely seminar. This presentation will address the current state of recycling in the copper industry, highlighting the secondary sector not only in terms of volume, but also as an economic activity, and then try to put this in the context of the current discussion surrounding critical elements. And the figures that we're going to see here is based on the work that we do at the International Copper Study Group, which is based here in Lisbon. So, as a context, some environmental aspects. Today we're seeing an annual extraction of raw materials surpassing 100 billion tons, and this trend is expected to increase. Some analysis indicate that by mid-century, demand for virgin materials will double once again. From another perspective, in the last 5 decades, extraction of natural resources has increased nearly 400% due to factors like industrialization, urbanization, and population growth. And this extensive stripping of air resources is creating important environmental externalities. For instance, the activity is responsible for about 40% of air pollution and 90% of water stress and biodiversity loss related to land use. If we focus on the mining industry itself, the activity is the backbone for many other industries, in particular for new energy technologies. But the industry is facing increasing pressure from governments, investors, and communities alike in order to reduce its own share of emissions. On average, it's estimated that it's responsible for about 4 to 7% of global emissions. In the same line, as the world races to reduce emissions, critical elements, as we have seen here, are attracting more attention, which creates both opportunities and challenges. For instance, while the industry on land is working towards meeting the expected increase in demand, attention is shifting to other developments like seabed mining, which is rising as one of the most divisive frontiers. Some countries have already declared bans or moratoria, while others are pushing for exploration and commercial development. And these add to other ESG factors like tailings management, pollution, and others that are relevant for securing the social license to operate. So in that context, what's the role of recycling? Perhaps the most straightforward answer is that it provides an eco-efficient method for reintroducing a valuable material into the economy, in particular requires less energy and produces less emissions. In the case of copper, in a business as usual scenario, secondary supply could provide about 30% of the expected increase in demand, but some analyses indicate that it could be as much as 50%. So the main takeaway with this is that while recycling might not suffice to meet the anticipated demand, it does hold importance in environmental terms and can also play an important role in the supply side. Here I'm advancing some statistics, but I think it's interesting to comment on two of the most well-known indicators for recycling. The end-of-life recycling rate is the percentage of metal post-consumer scrap that is actually recycled. So it's essentially a measure on how well society is recovering metals after products reach their end of life. Meanwhile, the recycling input rate measures the proportion of total scrap, both post-consumer and manufacturing, in total metal production. So here we see an interesting visualization for recycling rates for elements for which there is estimate by value range. This is based on a report by United Nations 2011. So it's not new, but still recycling rates don't change that much, so it's still a useful reference. At the very least, it provides an interesting visualization on how these indicators are distributed. So this is the end of life and the recycling input rate. So with that background, we can see some statistics for copper. At the ICSG, we rely on information from governments and the industry, so there is a natural lag. So the statistics here are for 2023. In that year, the recycling input rate stood at 32%, a small decrease in relation to the previous year. Here is another visualization. Total supply was 33 million tons with the corresponding contribution of each source, primary and secondary. This is an interesting figure that shows the behavior of this indicator by income level as defined by the World Bank. And the interesting thing here is that we don't necessarily have to assume that high-income economies will have higher recycling rates, because in this case, what is relevant is the presence of a developed semis market. For instance, in Europe, Germany plays a major role. In Asia, India, Japan, and China are important actors. But as countries continue to strengthen their supply chain, in particular, increasing the recycling capacity, we should expect a change in this behavior. Perhaps the most recent and relevant example is what is happening with the Critical Raw Materials Act, as the EU defined very specific targets by 2030, like 10% of production, extraction, 40% of processing, and 15% of recycling must take place internally. So that is something that makes us think that this will change in the medium term, in the next 10 to 15 years. And here we see an interesting statistic for 3 different periods defined by the energy sources powering societal advancement. The relevant here is that it's expected for copper, for demand for copper to reach about 50 million tons by mid-century. And what happened is that in the last decade, primary production has increased at an average of 500,000 tons per year. So this begs the question of whether the world will be able to meet the net zero target. But if we remain positive, assuming that the world will be able to do this, assuming a fixed recycling rate of 33%, fixed inflation, and copper prices at a 10-year average, we can estimate the value of a scrap market for copper. Of course, many things can happen, supply disruption, movements in prices, and new technologies, but the figures here are aligned and fall in the scope with estimates from leading consulting firms when analyzing the value of critical minerals by mid-century. So with all that background, in terms of the discussion about critical elements, I will say that something that is important to consider is that for secondary supply to play a role, it is necessary for a large amount of materials reaching the end of life. And this is not expected to happen before mid-2030s for many of these elements. So from that perspective, copper appears as a leading metal, not only in terms of its value and importance for new technologies, but because of its established and mature primary and secondary sector, can lead the way and support the development of secondary supply for other critical minerals. So I just was interested to close with this quote from Mr. von Goethe, that 200 years ago said that wealth and speed was what everyone strove for. Today, critical elements are receiving all the attention, but true progress, it not depend only on achieving net zero targets and how fast we can extract them, but how wisely we can recycle and reuse metals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. We are now moving from copper to magnesium with our next speaker, Martin Wolfgang Tauber. Martin is a strategy advisor with over 30 years experience in different raw materials related industries, notably magnesium, and founder of Faris, hope I pronounce it correctly, a management consulting company since 2009. Martin is also European representative and former chairman of the European Committee of the International Magnesium Association and founding president of the Critical Raw Material Alliance. He will talk today about magnesium, its strategic relevance and outlook for Europe. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and remaining good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the kind introduction. Magnesium metal. I think it's important to say metal to avoid some confusions, and I will come back to that later. What is the IMA? The International Magnesium Association is a long-standing industrial global platform. It's normally managed from out of the US, but also the Chinese Magnesium Association and the Japanese Magnesium Association, and recently the Indian network is part of the IMA. So you can imagine within the last half year or ongoing, it's an interesting challenge to go. So why we are here, we don't have a mining problem. We do have financing, and we do have an accepting problem especially in the European industry, and I'll come back later to that. When I prepared the slides, of course, if you are a speaker on the second day, you don't know what's already happened the day before. So I will just, with a few slides, I will just hop over if you don't mind. I will concentrate on the benchmarks and on the Critical Raw Materials Act. I think we have heard mostly negative arguments about the act and its probability to be reached until 2030. We will add our comments to that. If you're familiar with that, that was the applications from the first round of the CRM Act. So we had about 170 something eligible projects, and 47 projects were selected. Surprisingly also for us, 11 projects were sent in from magnesium, 7 from the EU territory, and 4 from abroad. And 1 project was selected in the category of extraction. So I think that's important to remember. When I said we don't have a mining problem, but from the European Commission, we were selected as the only project in magnesium metal in the category of extraction. That was given to Verde Magnesium in Romania. We're very happy about that. They are about to use a process called aluminothermic process. It's not a new process from a technical point of view, but a new process for magnesium. And it has a completely different business case because it uses byproducts as well. And it's one answer to the so-called Chinese price, or what we heard yesterday, that the Chinese suppliers can regain their monopoly situation by influencing the market. The next deadline will be in January next year. And what we heard, there will be also some projects, or there will be a possibility to combine extraction with processing project. Why I'm hammering such on this, so this is the reflection of, from our point of view, to the Critical Raw Materials Act benchmarks. So in principle, it's the 10% for extraction and the 40% of processing. So we are thinking that magnesium primary production is a processing process, not an extraction process. With the extraction, with the minerals we need, dolomite, brucite, serpentine, and also brine in the electrolytical process, they are not mentioned in any critical or strategic lists. So the processing is the issue, and there is 40%. If you take the market today, about 1.2 million tons produced, mainly in China, then Europe is about 95% or more dependent on Chinese imports, both on pure and alloyed and powder and what have you. So it is a target about 80,000 tons of primary capacity. Interesting enough is that, I don't know if you know that, magnesium had a supply crisis, mainly noticed by the aluminum industry, end of 21. And then it triggered at the European Commission an ad hoc high-level working group to bring back brownfield and greenfield magnesium primary production. They had identified about 17 to 19 different projects. Since then, nothing has happened. So nothing has built out of that. That initiative was in 22. And then when I got the first draft of the Act, the Critical Raw Materials Act, I was wondering where the primary production has went. And primary production is not mentioned anywhere in the Act. So the end of the day, the magnesium interest was when the energy prices got high, and the people in DG Grow, they recognize that primary production in general is an energy-intensive process, and that's why it's very difficult to finance this. And this was in 22, 23. So remember, with the 40%, we need about 80,000 tons primary production in Europe. That means with the current production plans or projects in the pipeline, about three projects. The recycling issue we heard about from copper. I think for Europe in total, recycling is not an issue. We have, similar to aluminium, we have the post-industrial scrap cycle is very well established. For magnesium alone, post-consumer is not established at all, so it remains in the aluminium cycle. If you see from the 180,000 tons, about 80,000 tons plus minus are used for the aluminium industry as a recycling element. Where we have really a problem is with the 65% from one single country. Currently, Europe receives about 95% from one country. That's just some examples from the US. We heard a lot of the US, that they are fast with financing. We also have here some grants for 2 companies. And just yesterday, one magnesium primary project was awarded with $120 million US dollars in Australia. So there is happening in that part of the world. Europe will not very much benefit from that. This is our sustainability statement. I think from the whole audience and the conferences that it's in our DNA, so we just skip it. We have also developed similar to other industries, and that's for our customers, for the end users, the decarbonization roadmap. That's only based on CO2, but we will include some other elements as well. And we have done a step further, so we are developing this together with our Chinese members. So we are not developing this for Europe decarbonization roadmap, so this is global, because we think we have a global customer base and we have to serve our global customers with that. This is just, you find it in the proceedings, then a current list of project pipelines outside China. We have also material which is similar to the aluminum industry, which with a low carbon footprint. Also the recycling carbon footprint, energy use recycling is as low as with aluminum products. So they are quite competitive. With what I want to end here is, and I liked very much this morning, that we always think of the raw materials, but we have problems in the end products. And just some examples here, the Dongfeng car has, for instance, magnesium parts with around 34, 35 kilos, only 2 parts. The average in European cars is about 3.5 kilo. So you can imagine what when this goes in other cars as well, and it will disrupt the whole value chain, the recycling chain, the raw material chain, and the production chain. And Europe is not prepared for that. So nobody is willing to invest in those big machines. There are, for instance, 8,000 tons die casting machines, 6,000 tons Dixo molding machines, then safe hydrogen storage on transport. We don't have the facilities in that for Europe. And for instance, this truck, so the whole trolley is out of magnesium profiles, which enables them to load significant more to the lorry. We don't have any downstream facilities in Europe who could produce that type of application. Yes, I will end with the military aircraft. So there's also magnesium in airplanes and military aircrafts, and we are also trying to get this known more to the public and to NATO, because we are not on the NATO 13 strategic materials for NATO. Yeah, with that, I'm open for questions later on as well. Thank you very much. I just have overlooked the time a bit.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. The next presentation will be a case study, actually. So I'm really looking forward to hear from Joaquin Merino Marquez, who is a senior professional geologist with over 25 years of experience in the mining industry. His career spans international experience across South America, Europe, Asia-Pacific region. He's president and director of Emerita Resources Corporation, a Canadian mineral resources exploration company, and is also a member of the Association of Professional Geoscientists of Ontario. He's going to present us the Iberian Belt West Exploration Project.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for having me today. So let's start with the cautionary notes. Then a bit about the Emerita Resources Corporation. We are listed in the TSX Venture. We were awarded with the position within the 50 top companies in the TSX based on our performance. And we are based on in the Iberian Pyrite Belt, exploring in the Spanish side of the Iberian Belt. So we have found silver, zinc, copper, gold, and lead. Well, I must say that Mother Nature, it is what it is, and just copper is within the list of the critical metals. But I would like to also, considering we are in a mining and exploration forum, that gold, as we all know, has passed the $4,000 an ounce. As an explorer, I think we also keep an eye on the metals that actually carries and brings value. Just to talk about mining in Europe, this is just the contribution of mining to the GDP. And as you can see in the graph on the left, is Sweden and Poland, the ones that contribute with the most, I would say, close to 1%. But then Europe is less than 0.1%. And I have to remind that the mining industry was developed in this continent, but it doesn't look to be actually taking place this time. And then when you compare the European Union with the rest of the world, we have Chile, Australia, even United States and China, they are over 1.5% contribution of the mining to the GDP. So a lot of work to do, I would say. This is just an example what other countries are doing. This is the copper mining, the producers, starting from Chile, Peru, Congo, a bit of China. That's the graph in the left. But then when you compare that to the graph on the right, this is the copper refining capacity. As you will see there, that China has been preparing itself to pretty much treat and produce all the metal copper in the world, if they want to, okay? This graph is probably very well known of some of you here in the audience. I just want to highlight how important and how relevant is this life cycle of a mineral discovery. So we start with a concept. Then probably we have a lot of projects there at that step. We need to continue with drilling, and hopefully we make some of them gonna make a discovery. We will add value to the project. But then we need to demonstrate those projects are feasible, and therefore some of them will be left behind. And finally, maybe a couple of those get enough money to develop the project, and finally maybe one became a mine. So this is the reality for us. This is this is an activity that requires a lot of time and a lot of money to go from a concept to a mine in production. It is not a straight line. It requires effort, talent, capacity, experience. So, and this is where we are today. We saw this same slide yesterday, I think, basically to highlight that we are not spending enough money in the exploration and the grassroots exploration project. Therefore, if we don't find ore deposit, the conclusion is very simple. We are not going to be able to develop new mines. I think that most of the money is being spent around mines because it represents less risk, but at the same time, all those old mines, many of those, particularly here in Europe, comes with a very heavy environmental liability, which is not what we want. So my suggestion is we should rethink about how and where spending our money into exploration. And now let me introduce the Iberian Belt West, which is the project we have right now. It is located, what you see there is the Iberian Pyrite Belt. We are pretty much in the center of the Iberian Belt, between the Spanish and Portuguese border, very strategically very well located, close to the Guadiana River, which will give us access to the Atlantic Ocean, and also close to the Huelva port, as well as the Sines port in Portugal. It's just, as I said, very well located. How we have got here? Well, we start drilling into 2021 with 5,000 meters of diamond drilling. Today, we have passed 130,000 meters of drilling, and we have spent more than $30 million getting to this point. We have produced a mineral resource estimation this year, and also we have applied for the mining license to the regional government. We expect to receive sometime next year. So let me show you now the resources estimation. These are based on real metallurgical data. And as you can see here, we have 19 million as indicated, 6 point something as inferred, so about 75-25%. And the size of the circles represent the economic impact of each of the metals we have found in our deposits. So it stands out the gold, and also zinc, copper, and silver. So this is just a view of the deposit. So one of the three deposits we have, which is dipping to the north, will allow us for underground mining methods. This is an overview of the project. The three polygons of yellow, green, and pink represent the three deposits. They are about 10 kilometers apart. And the idea is to develop a modern mine, and we will get access through this about 9 kilometers long adit. And we plan to produce 1.1 to 1.3 million tons a year. So we will have a flotation plant to produce zinc concentrate, and after that, a post-flotation circuit just to lixiviate copper, to produce metal copper, together with the precious metals. Once when we obtain the license, it's going to give us 30 years. That will come, we can renew it for another 60 years. That's the project, and this is, to me, as an explorer, the fundamentals that we always have to keep in mind. So it's not just, we need to start with the geology. In order to get this project, a successful project in mining, we need to start with the geological potential. We need to also have financing for that, so we need people, banks that understand the mining business and the risk. Social and environmental aspects should be taken into consideration from the very beginning. Regulatory and political aspects should also be part of the solution and not part of the problem. They need to understand the mining business, because at the end is the business who is going to bring up the metals that we need. Commodity prices, a favorable market always helps for exploration and to develop the projects. Technology is always good to find the deposits, to improve metallurgical recoveries and all that, but something we have to keep in mind is that technology does not change Mother Nature. It is the deposit, it is what it is. And of course, sustainability. So just the last one here, just to finish my presentation. Let's see if it goes. Okay. Just again, we have been using the critical word for the last couple of days very often. I just want to use it one more time, but this time I want to relate it to the mineral deposit. We need to be focused as explorers on these critical mineral deposits, which in my opinion, three characteristics this deposit should have. First of all, it's grade. Doesn't matter the commodity. We mine ore. We do not mine waste. Simple to understand, but not always seems to be the case. Size. We need to make huge investment. In our case, for instance, we are talking about $350 to $400 million to develop the project. It has to last at least one generation, so people is going to appreciate what modern mining is. And then continuity. If a deposit is not continuous, we cannot generate resources. And of course, if you don't have resources, you cannot produce reserve, and therefore, there's nothing there to be mined out. And on top of that, if that commodity is one of those critical commodities, well, then even better. Thank you very much. That's all for now. Okay?
Thank you very much for this overview on the Iberian Belt West Exploration Project. I think it's becoming clear from all these presentations we had so far, there are still many challenges ahead in front of us. I would like to introduce now the next speaker, Konstantin Bilic. He's Managing Director of Europe, CIS and Turkey region at HI Magnesita. He has been with the company for more than 10 years in multiple roles around the globe, like you. Today, he's bringing us a critical raw material perspective from the field, and especially looking at magnesia and how our company tackled the challenge and try to maximize sources. Konstantin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So today I will talk about an unsung hero of modern life, which is refractories and more specifically magnesia. But before I get there, safety is inherently important, not only for our company, but for myself. I would like to share an incident that happened a couple of days ago in one of our open pit mining sites in Tyrolia in Austria, where there was a road accident involving actually a normal road truck that was traveling on the side and that got damaged quite badly. Thank God, our employee and colleague did not have any damage to himself physically, so he wasn't injured. Thank God, I say, but actually it's not thank God for his seatbelt, because he was wearing a seatbelt. And that's what actually saved his life. Now you're going to tell me, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Why do you tell us about seatbelts? That's a cause that I ask you to think about. I'm sure all of you wear your seatbelts when you take your normal car. Specifically, if the family's in the back, you check that they wear their seatbelts. But let me ask you this. When you sat in the taxi that probably brought you from the airport to the hotel a couple of days ago, did you wear your seatbelt? Or did you wear it last time that you were in a bus or a larger van? So if you did, great. If you didn't, think about this and maybe any other unfamiliar situation that any moving vehicle, doesn't matter if it's your car or another car, if you sit in the back or front, just always think about, please, wear your seatbelt. Good. Now, question. Who here knows about refractories? Oh, wow, I'm impressed. That's actually more people than I usually get, right? So let's talk later on at coffee around refractories. For anybody else, right? I think it's pretty clear. I don't need to explain to you how critical minerals and specifically metals are for our modern life. They're all around us, but also cement, glass, everything around here. Now, all of these materials have two things in common. First of all, they're all mined in some sort. That's why we're here. But second of all of these materials actually go through a high temperature process. And this high temperature process would not be possible without refractories that are high temperature resistant materials. And they're mostly made out of magnesia, which is a magnesium oxide, but there's also other forms on it. But as you can see from the chart, to the left specifically, you don't need a lot of refractories to actually be producing any of these materials. When you take a look at steel, at cement, at glass, you generally need about a couple of kilograms of refractories, but they're extremely critical because in the best case, they just ensure that you make a good quality product. In the worst case, for example, if they fail, you can get to a breakthrough in the process, in the vessel, and suddenly be faced with 150 or 200 tons of liquid molten steel on the shop floor, which I think we can all agree would be an absolute disaster. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, because refractories is our business. So RHI Magnesita is the leader in refractories. And as you can see, we're not an extremely large company. We're sort of a medium-sized company. We are global everywhere around the world, and we serve about 4/5 of the steel plants, the copper processing plants, the aluminum plants, the cement plants in this world, which makes us quite proud and in our sense also quite a huge contributor. But what sets us apart, and that's also why I'm standing here at MINEX and not at the refractory sort of, exhibition, is that we are actually so-called backwards integrated. So we mine our own raw materials. We have about 20 mining sites around the world. As you can see, we're spread out from Europe to the US to South America and Brazil to China and India. And importantly here, and that's why let's talk about Europe, we have about 5 mining sites actually in Europe across Austria, Slovenia, Slovakia. And now we come to the importance of magnesia, right? Because this is what we mostly mine, and that is quite critical in our sense. We talked a lot about the Critical Raw Materials Act, right? And just as a reminder, these are all the raw materials that are covered by the Critical Raw Materials Act. Now I ask you, did you know that actually 50% of the strategic raw materials on this list can only be processed and recycled using refractories made from magnesia? 30% of the critical raw materials, so that means from the full list, it's the same. So that means that although, as you can clearly see, magnesia is not on the list, you actually need magnesia in the whole chain to be providing for these critical and strategic raw materials. And I really like the comment that a participant made beforehand, is that this is a classical example where you can't just think of one material or one element, you got to think of the chain that actually comes with it. And why is this so critical? Why am I standing here banging on about this? Because when you actually take a look, where do we get our magnesia from? 80% of our needs today in Europe come from China, because we are actually the only player that is backwards integrated. Most other market participants are actually sourcing their magnesia from China. So that means if this supply were to stop, it takes 1 to 2 months, and 4/5 of the steel plants in Europe shut down. They can't operate anymore. Not out of lack of iron ore or energy, but simply because they lack the refractories to actually be producing what they do. Similar for copper smelters, similar for cement plants. It takes a little bit longer because the refractories are longer lived. And that's a classical, that's why I said beforehand, unsung hero, because we don't really have this on the radar. Not a lot of people know about this, but it's a huge Achilles heel. Now, what can we do about this, right? There's 3 options. First of all, we can find an alternative to magnesia for refractories. I can assure you, our company has been doing research into this for 120 years, trying to find an alternative. We haven't been too successful so far. Nobody else has been very successful so far. Now, I do hope we will find an alternative at some point because it's pretty CO2 intensive, but I'm not really hopeful we will find one in the next 5 years. So that means we've got to stick to it, right? So second of all, what we can do is actually increase the locally sourced and mined magnesia. I think this goes very much into what we discussed already amply over the last 1.5 days. And very clearly here the call is that even though it's not perfect, the Critical Raw Materials Act, very clearly not, and there's lots of improvements to be done, but we've got to get a material like magnesia also on the list of critical raw materials. Otherwise, it's pretty much useless because we do need this for the remaining strategic raw materials. But there is a third option that I'd like to explore a little bit, because this is also the title of the session, which is primary and secondary sources of raw material. When you take a look at refractories have a lifetime. So by the time that they come to the end of their lifetime, they get broken out of the process, right? So you take them out, and only about 30% of the refractories actually remains. So the rest of the refractories actually gets lost in the process. It goes into the steel, the copper, the metal, but in such small amounts that it's not seen. But that means we have a potential to be recycling and specifically bringing into circularity 30% of the magnesia needs that we have. When you take a look at our industry, historically, the recycling rate was at 3 to 5%. We always shied away from this. We always thought, no, but recycled magnesia is not going to be as good as the real stuff. And we really changed this mindset now. So as you can see now in Europe, we are already at a recycling rate of 22%. So that means we use 22% of secondary raw material. And even globally, within our company, we're at 15%. And not only does this reduce the dependence that we have on imported raw materials, specifically from places like China, but also in that element, we are reducing CO2 emissions, because obviously we don't have to actually process this materials mostly again. And also we're reducing landfill. So all in all, it's a win-win. And again, with 30% remaining, it's not going to solve our magnesia dependence. But as I think a number of also the panelists have said, it can add a lot to actually in the short term, at least de-risk it to a certain degree. And here we're actually quite proud to be presenting something that, the biggest challenge in this whole question is the sorting, right? So you get a huge pile of spent refractories and you need to sort through it. You know how we do this today? It's manual. It's actually people that are doing this for 5, 6, 7 years, and they sort this manually. I know that for some of you this might sound very archaic, but that's the reality that we stand at. And we didn't accept that. So actually, with the fantastic help of the Horizon Europe Resource Project, we developed an automated sorting technology that actually uses 3D plus hyperspectral imaging and also LIBS, so this is a laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, in order to increase the yield of the spent refractories. And this is what we call the Raptor. You can see this on the left, right? It's actually a modular, very mobile, super effective installation. So we can bring this anywhere where the sorting is required, right? And it actually has a yield, so don't get confused with the recycling rate up there. It means the yield that you take from the 100% of materials you put in there that are used refractories, you can yield 90% out of useful, again, to be using in new refractories or other materials. And I think this is maybe a small incremental innovation from a large perspective, but this shows that actually with a lot of these small incremental innovations, we can also ensure that we maximize that circularity and that secondary raw material source. So as a summary, magnesia is important, but unfortunately unknown. That means that we will live up to the primary mining needs in terms of extraction and processing goals, very clearly. But we need to broaden this. We also need to broaden this to exactly something like the Raptor that actually meets the CRMA-aligned recycling ambitions that we have by 2030. But what we need for this, not only as a company, but as an industry, and from my perspective as a continent, we need to recognize that magnesia is a critical and strategic raw material, and as a participant said before, and ensure that it's not only on the list, but that we actually funnel financial support and innovation support into this area, just like Resource, for example, is doing for the moment. Because that, for me, is exactly what the title of this session is all about. It's sustainable mining and rehabilitation in action. Thank you very much.
Super interesting. Thank you, Konstantin. I'm learning so much today for all these presentations, and I'm looking forward to learn even more about the next one, which will be another case study. Andrew Bumber, I'm really like to welcome you on the stage to talk about a deposit in Scotland. You will tell us a little bit more about that in your presentation. Andrew is Managing Director at Barron Consulting. He has an extensive experience in process design, process technology development, and financial evaluation. Andrew, welcome.
Martina, thanks for the kind introduction, and Arthur and team, thanks for the opportunity to speak. So I think this is probably the most technical presentation in the session, but I'm going to start with a cultural question. Does anybody in the room know what tatties and neeps are? All right, excellent. I asked that question in America, like no hands went up. Tatties are potatoes and neeps are turnips, and this will become relevant a bit later in the presentation. So I'm going to just speak a little bit about Barra and our client in this presentation, Aberdeen Minerals. Explain a little bit about how nickel, copper, and cobalt actually arrives in Scotland. It's very early stage, so hence the technical nature of the presentation. We'll talk a bit about the characteristics of the deposit, leading into how we interpret that in terms of the process mineralogy and interpretation of process routes for treatment of the rocks. Talk about available processing routes for this kind of metallurgy in the first place, and the motivation for the specific process route that we are looking at for this deposit and the innovations that it embodies. Talk a little bit about markets, because that's relevant to the economics, obviously, of the project and the processing routes chosen. So just a quick note about Barra. We're a boutique resources, mining, processing infrastructure, financial modeling and reporting consultancy. We operate globally out of offices in South Africa, United Kingdom, and now Canada. We have a few thoughts about Australia, but they haven't crystallized yet. Aberdeen Minerals, privately held, which is like an interesting differentiator for mining projects and clients compared to, say, a listed entity. Currently exploring for deposits of nickel, copper, cobalt, etc. in Scotland. A larger shareholder, Central Asia Metals, big supporter of the project and the ultimate end goal here. in the very early days, as a lot of projects in the UK are and have been quite strongly grant supported, and in this particular case by what's called the Automotive Transition Fund, which is some kind of corollary, I guess, to the European Just Transition Fund. Why Northeast Scotland? It has historically, because of its broader geology, been a prospective area for economic geology, critical raw materials, good indicators for nickel copper sulfides, and as a jurisdiction for developing mining projects, excellent infrastructure, excellent available and actually relatively cheap power, which is a big driver for mining projects. Has historically had interest from large mining companies, but for a variety of reasons they did not see success and walked away, and that opportunity has now been picked up, in this particular case, by Aberdeen Minerals. These nickel copper deposits were discovered early in the 1960s with initial government grant funded exploration, Consolidated Goldfields, and Rio Tinto stuck some holes in this deposit. The reason why it was actually discovered in the first place, or the presence of the deposit was noted in the first place, was because of nickel toxicity in the turnips and some particular affinity of turnips for nickel. Normally it's by soil sampling. In this case, it was by vegetable sampling. And that vector allowed confidence in the presence and location of the deposit to be confirmed, and formal exploration ensued thereafter. Why specifically that part of Scotland, or why specifically Scotland? These kind of deposits tend to form on the boundaries of regional tectonic plates. Sudbury in Canada is actually at the junction of two plates. Voisey's Bay, very famous nickel discovery in Canada as well, also on the boundary of tectonic plates. Great Dyke in Zimbabwe, quite extensive intrusion along the boundary of a plate. Bushveld is actually a massive regional intrusion at the junction of two plates again. And Scotland happens to host a tectonic boundary of that nature, so quite likely that there would be a deposit there. Just need to stick some holes in and discover it. So there is a deposit model that's been explored now quite systematically by Aberdeen, leading to the declaration of an exploration target in 2023, 20 to 34 million tons. Quite large, actually, in the context of nickel copper deposits. That's on the high side of a volume, but relatively low grade at this stage, which does present some challenges. Therefore, innovation is required. Gangue mineralogy is typical for a mafic, ultramafic intrusion, mainly gabronorites, some peridotites, so quite heavy and quite hard and dense elements of the rock, which we'll come to later, with process mineralogy including pentlandite, obviously hosting the nickel, chalcopyrite, pyrrhotite, and again, a feature of the deposit, quite substantial intergrowth of the pentlandites and the chalcopyrites in the pyrrhotite, which again presents challenges in processing. This is where the innovation was really driven for the project. Available processing routes, I think, as the previous speaker suggested, are largely pyrometallurgical, which is incredibly energy intensive. It's also capital intensive, so you need a certain quality and scale of project to justify a pyrometallurgical route, and there are certain qualities of feedstock that go into those processes that are required. If you can't meet those qualities, typically a hydrometallurgical route such as high-pressure acid leach would be considered, but again, those process routes present capital intensities and energy and therefore cost intensities that again demand a certain size, scale, quality of project, and that's not immediately available or evident here, so innovation was definitely required. The enabling technology for this project, and this was the subject of the grant support from Automotive Technology Fund, was the investigation of glycine leach for the leaching of the concentrates from the project. If anybody knows anything about process engineering, atmospheric pressure, low temperature leaching, it's the holy grail Means you can do relatively small scale processing, low energy intensity, low capital intensity, obviously low cost, on relatively low grades of material then, and that's a massive enabler. The other enabler for this project was because the glycine leach lixiviates all the metals in concert, it's not selective to any of the particular metals between nickel, copper, and cobalt. It also allows, and this is why this project's relevant to the battery materials subject of this conference, you can then precipitate out directly a nickel sulfate and a cobalt sulfate, which is a feedstock directly into the battery materials value chain. So you skip an entire energy-intensive and capital-intensive stage of the flow sheet, and that's a massive enabler for this project in particular. So there's a combination of innovation, combination of available process technologies that are innovative, and again, the available of a local market for a particular product that can be produced by this flow sheet that completely enables this project and supports its progress going forwards. So while the potential for mafic, ultramafic deposits was long known in Scotland, it's taken dedicated, systematic. Galen and his team are working with the CEO of Aberdeen, Fraser, who himself I think is a big part of how this has moved forward, with focused and intense and very, I think, intellectual approaches to how you develop projects has enabled it to move forward. So now there is the potential for a medium-large nickel, copper, cobalt project to be developed in Scotland, and enabled by novel process technologies and a local market that move this project forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Talking a lot about innovation, the next speaker will also have some interesting perspectives and examples to share with us. I'm very happy to introduce Marco Comac, who is a geologist with over 27 years of experience in companies, teams, and project management, research, international cooperation. He was the Director General of Geological Surveys of Slovenia and CEO of a startup and managing director of One Geology Initiative. Marco is involved in several European projects, working from project inception to project development and implementation. So he has a lot of experience, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Welcome, Marco, please.
Thank you, Martina. Well, Martina, before the talk, asked me a big challenge, how to reduce my 3 hours presentation into 5 minutes. So I'm going to do my best and hope you'll catch the afternoon coffee break. Okay, I'm going to present you the project Bloom, which has now been running for a year. So after birth complications, we are now already developing what we aim to do in this project. So let me put my eyes on, and let's go to the next slide. So I won't go into details because we've been talking about challenges and stuff that we have to address in Europe for many presentations during the past day and a half. So I'm just going to skip this, and I'm go directly to the Bloom aims. So the Bloom project sets up to optimize the process of ore processing from excavating to the, let's say, meat product delivery that goes then into the metallurgy processes. So what we want to do is to address those challenges we have in Europe, which are deep mines, low-grade ores, and of course with that we need to optimize the processes to be economically feasible and competitive to other resources outside Europe. So we have 6 objectives, and on each slide there are 2. What we want to do is to develop a modular analysis system where we will combine the mineral liberation analysis supported by AI tools within each of the steps of the ore processing. So with that, we immediately see how good we are doing within that specific step, and to feed back almost in real time the information and to optimize that part of the step and throughout the whole ore processing process. And of course, with that, we will, like I said, optimize the whole process and reduce costs. Now, what we want to do is also to make it as flexible as possible. So that's why we are introducing this modular analysis system that is basically disintegrating the whole process from the conceptual perspective, of course, into a block of separate steps. And towards the end of the project, we want to also test what we are developing, and it's going to be put in a sort of transportable container. The whole, let's say, the system, the process, which is basically laboratory equipment, and it's going to be tested in 2 sites, at least 2 sites. One in Ukraine, hopefully that will also be realized, and one in Canada. And we are already looking for alternatives because we might have some challenges within the Ukraine mine. So we are looking also into to some partners that cooperate in the project from Brazil. Now, since we want to bring as advanced technology development as possible, we want to, of course, address the life cycle analysis and to show where we have benefits, where we have gaps, and where we can do some follow-up, upscaling or improvement of the process. And of course, we need to also take into consideration to achieve as little footprint, environmental footprint as possible, and to do it in as circular possible way also in relation to the business model. This is the concept in a nutshell. It's rather simple throughout the whole process of the ore preparation for the high-grade metal outputs. We will introduce the mineral liberation analysis and AI tools, like I said, to feed in within each of the steps. And those on the right are the steps within the project. We already passed the Bloom inception phase. Now we are almost at the end of the requirements phase, and then the fine-tuning will follow up, like I said, the testing or demonstration on-site, and at the end, economical and business assessment of the technology. There are 15 partners from 6 countries. 2 of them are outside Europe. One is neighboring country of Europe, but basically there are only 3 European Union countries. And we have a vast a plethora of knowledge within that consortium, from geology to the computer science. And with that, I hope I've not been boring you for the 3 hours, but only for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Amazingly perfect on time. So I'm very happy because now we are heading to the last presentation of today. Manuel Silva is a mining engineer with over 10 years of experience in mining all over the world. He specializes in metallurgic optimization, mine planning, and project management. He has consulting experience on various base and precious metals projects, lithium and fertilizers projects located throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Manuel, welcome. And look, happy to hear your presentation. I have a question for you: how can we unlock value in European mining? I hope you will answer to that with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Block models represent mineral deposits through attributes and numbers. And we use them to develop an entire mining project with beautiful features. So it turns out that each number tells a beautiful story, but only if you know how to read it. So today I will be talking about how to unlock value in underground mining. And my contention today is that hard work and advanced technology are important, but unlocking value in underground mining comes from understanding properly the mining flow, and even more important, the link between the multidisciplinary teams throughout all the process. So today we are facing an interesting stage in the mining history. We have more data, and therefore we understand mining perhaps better than ever before. However, mineral deposits are getting deeper and lower in grade, and therefore more complex. And in this context, we must understand the workflow and the key steps. As you can see in that workflow, mining is an iterative process. And throughout all this process, we will have to integrate the multidisciplinary studies. Because if we don't integrate them, we will not have the pillar that withstand the project, and we will not be able to meet the project in budget, time, and in quality. A good starting point is the strategic planning. And here we will be defining basically three things: the mining method, the cutoff, and the production rate. And these three things will come from assessing several scenarios. For instance, the cutoff, in this case, it will not be an input, will be an output. And an output of assessing several scenarios, but also the context of the project and the priorities. For instance, we will be optimizing, let's say, the MPV, as usual. But what happens if we have several environmental constraints and we can't keep enough material on surface? So then the waste storage or the tailing storage will be an input that we will have to integrate along with the MPV. And there the things change. Then we move forward to the mining studies, and here we will be digging deeper. So one of the starting points here is the optimization. We want to get mineable shapes, and we usually use a software to get the mineable shapes. And this is very important, but perhaps as important as this, or even more important, is the processing of those mineable shapes. And here is where the insight from the people is crucial. So in this case, for example, we have at the bottom of the slide example where we are filtering out or removing all the shapes, the mineable shapes, the result of this stop optimization that were within a 5 meters buffer surrounding the excavated areas within the underground mine. So then we move forward with the coding of the shapes, and we will be identifying whether these shapes are accessible, mineable, pillars, and so on. And when we have our remaining shapes, in this case the green ones, the inventory, we move forward with the mine design. How are we going to reach these shapes? And finally, the scheduling. And in the scheduling, we will be answering the question, how are we going to meet that production rate that we defined at the beginning with realistic or viable rates for the equipment that we are considering, but also considering fair and viable constraints for the life of the mine. So we already reviewed a big picture of this, and let's put this in context. Lithium in the world is really important, but in Europe it's critical. Europe consumes around a quarter of the lithium produced in the world, but only produces 0.1% of this lithium. In this context, SRK UK addressed an European lithium project last year. And as usual, we started with a block model, what you are seeing now. And we went from this block model to a mine design and to a 3 years ramp-up schedule review. And one of the starting points, of course, was the strategic planning. Here, we assessed 18 scenarios. And after doing this, we defined a production rate of 1.5 million tons per year. We defined a mining method, which in this case was long-hole stopping. And cutoff grade of 2,000 ppm of lithium. So then we moved with the stop optimization that I mentioned before. And after doing this, we got as the result total in situ material between measured and indicated of 100 million tons for this project. And another important and key aspect of this project that we assessed was the backfill. So for the backfill, the preferred method was paste fill. Paste fill offers higher recoveries, lower dilution, but in this specific project, we have several environmental constraints. So paste fill allows us to keep the tailings into the underground mine to don't use the surface. So this was a crucial point in this project to define the backfill method. Regarding the material handling system, we assessed two streams, one from the production levels to the underground crusher, and the other one from the underground crusher to the processing plant. For the first one, on the left, we defined that in each production level will be only loaders, and then we designed a handling level where only will be trucks. And on the other hand, for the second stream, we defined a conveyor belt to handle the material from the underground crusher to the processing plant. I will not go in detail here due to the time, but the key aspect here is that all the equipment that we considered in all these trade-offs were full electric equipment. And even though this was an input from the client, we learned a lot of things after assessing this about electric equipment. Then we moved forward with the filtering or the processing of the shapes after the stop optimization. And one of the key criterion here was to define a 20 meters buffer surrounding the axis decline, and all the shapes that were within this 20 meters buffer were sterilized, and therefore weren't considered in the mining inventory and either in the mine design. So with this, we have our shapes, and we moved forward with the mine design. So as this was a high-level mine design for this project, we assessed 7 levels in detail. And then we used an extrapolation rules using geometry and tonnage to factor the other 7 levels of the mine, which was a very practical and accurate approach. And after doing all this, we got that for the entire mine, 263 kilometers are required for development to build a mine. And we got a raw inventory of 88 million tons, which ensures a life of mine for this project of 58 years. Finally, we addressed a ramp-up schedule review for the first 3 years for this mine, and we identified that during the 3rd year, we reached the first 1 million tons per year of production rate, and the target production rate was able to be reached during the 4th or the 5th year. That is subject to another further studies, of course. So, in this brief presentation, we reviewed how we moved from a block model to a mining project. Software programs give us a lot of data, but people create value. And this is extremely important because when insight guides the process and people stay aligned, the hidden value becomes true. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you again. Very interesting presentation. I'm sure you agree with me. We had different overviews of case studies, projects, but also the bigger picture, I would say. We have time for questions from the audience. So it's your time, audience. Do you have any questions? Somebody who has a specific question? If that's the case, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and don't be shy. And yeah, let us know who your question is for. Anybody? Yeah, please. Is there a microphone?
Yeah. Okay, nobody else was going to ask a question, but this is for everybody. Everybody can answer, but I'm hearing a lot of technological advancements and everything else. I guess my general question is, we haven't seen a mine open in a long time in Europe, and this goes for Canada as well. We're struggling to open new mines, no matter where we are, in most jurisdictions. So with all of this new technology, how are we going to speed up that 20, 25-year time period, et cetera, and how are we going to, what is this going to do in the near term to find us a new mine, open up a new mine? That's for whoever wants to answer it, because it's a lot of technology, but is it going to find us a new mine faster and sooner? Thank you.
There we go. Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, to correct you, sorry, we opened a mine in Austria just 4 years ago. So we are opening new mines in existing sites, right? Yes, okay, so there's already an existing mining operation on another side. But I think we shouldn't be too black and white always to say that. Nevertheless, the challenge you put on the table is exactly that. It's how do we get fast approvals? In this case, how do we manage it? With a very, very close collaboration and interactions with the local community and the local governments, and actually also the national bodies within Austria that are responsible to be giving us a license to mine. Of course, it was easier because we already had a license to mine on another place, so then it's transferable. But I think ultimately I think in a lot of cases was said, it's not the money that's necessarily missing, right? I think there is enough capital out there to actually give it, and I think there were some great examples here, but it's the security that you need over the next decades from a legal perspective, from a sustainability perspective, and the actual approval in the first case that I think where we often struggle in a lot of places like Canada. I'm not familiar, but I assume it's similar to Europe as well, right? So that's where we need to be faster and more pragmatic, right?
Thanks. I'm going to step a little bit back before you actually get the licenses and start opening. I think the major challenge in Europe and probably in Canada, and we've heard also about Australia today, is how do we convince people that we actually have to open mines within our vicinity, not only rely on overseas resources that might stop over the night. So the first challenge I would see is that people still consider, and I think it was mentioned today, mining as being something from the 18th century, really dirty, really pollution heavily. And nowadays mining is moving forward. With all this technology being developed in innovation, we are almost at I would say, the verge of, in quotes, of course, invisible mining. Because we heard today already that keyhole mining is possible, and we have some really nice technological inventions in Europe that enable that. Now, that still doesn't help us how to convince people that with that novel technology we can actually reduce the impact on the environment. It cannot be sustainable, but it can be responsible, and it can be minimized to the optimum level. I still think, at least for Europe, I can say we are huge hypocrites. It's better to import all the resources, all the ores from somewhere else and let those locals deal with all the negative impacts. And we are driving around with EVs and using our iPhones, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the society in Europe needs to face the reality, and yesterday, Mr. Hahn had set a really nice topic or keynote. It was, we need to share the risk and responsibilities. And that's something the society needs to address as soon as possible. You have another question?
Well, it's a comment on what you're saying. Sorry to take up the time, but Canadians are hypocrites too, so sorry. There are other Canadians here, but yes, not in my backyard, right? Oil and gas, minerals, everything else. But again, if it's taken 20 years from discovery to mine, when we discover, we have to convince people that mining's important. But 20 years later, we got a new generation we have to convince on the exact same project. So it's got to be a continuous thing.
So I could just take one more bite at that one. I mean, so we're a resource mining processing infrastructure consultancy. We also do ESIA and ESG. And in our particular experience developing projects in Europe, including the Balkans, we see two things. I think in other jurisdictions where there are known ecological or perhaps what's called indigenous title issues, they're well raised up front, and companies engage early and well on those things. And for a generally publicly listed, say, TSXV company or an ASX-listed company, their obligations in terms of what we call the IFC performance standard, compliancy to that is relatively well known. What we experience in Europe is two things. The burning need to do engagement on fauna, flora, species, as well as particularly stakeholder engagement is less well recognized and isn't done particularly early. And there's also a mismatch that we see between the local EIA requirements that are perhaps, let's say, outdated and not in good alignment with either the IFC performance standard or the evolving EBRD performance standard, which is even stricter than the IFC standard. And companies happily follow the EIA process to get their local permitting sorted out and then hit more global barriers when the IFC requirements become clear, and that causes delays too. So I think stakeholder engagement and understanding of what the broader global performance standard for ESIA is a barrier here as well.
Something, just very briefly, I want to add something. I agree with all what have been said here, but well, mining industry, I got the impression that it's not very well known by other industries. The rest of the industry, they don't realize how much they need us in order to continue with their own businesses. The day that other industries had to stop because they ran out of copper, magnesium, whatever, then they will understand, and then they will be part of the solution and help us to put the message across the entire society. So they need to understand what we do, the value of what we do, and then we may have a chance there. That's what I think. Thank you. Anybody else?
Anybody else want to add to that? Or any other question from the audience? Yes, I see a hand raised over there. Please, sir, can someone give him a microphone over there? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Charles Chamiranya-Beze with the Center for Excellence in Mining Innovation out of Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. Portugal's best friend is Canada, by the way. For a question for Elena. Elena, the question I have is this. Given Europe's drive to strengthen its critical raw material supply chains, how does GlobSec see Canada's role in supporting European strategic autonomy in this area, particularly in the areas of innovation? How do you see Canada playing a role?
Thanks so much for the question, and it's great to see so many Canadians being so active in European Mining Forum as well. In terms of Canada, there are several things that we can do. First, no continent, no country can solve the issue by themselves, so there are always partnerships across the entire supply chains. Canada has been one of the most reliable partners. Also, Canada huge experience with mining, so that's definitely a huge asset. So where that could be particularly useful, of course, joint R&D projects. Canadian investments in Europe. There's like expert funds in Canada, but most of the investments don't go to European countries, they go elsewhere. Given all the challenges that we have here, if that changes, there can be also more financing coming from Canada for joint projects in Europe. And of course, when we're talking about what can be done to support maybe some even like not necessarily cost-efficient technologies right now, there's huge potential for joint offtakes agreements between European producers and Canadian companies as well. And the final point, defense sector has been mentioned several times, either because there's, for example, the critical materials used for defense industries and defense equipment. Canada is member of NATO, same as most of the European countries. There's a huge potential to bring in defense sector, but also the military in terms of, again, either helping with stockpiles and guaranteeing offtake from critical raw materials that are mined in Europe or in Canada for this matter, or guaranteeing supply for the local producers as well.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, in terms of the magnesium value chain, Canada is acting today as a filter for China to deliver into the US, because the US has a 140% of duty for Chinese magnesium raw materials. I think Canada is the obvious partner for Europe for primary supply. There have been several attempts in Canada to build a primary magnesium plant, and there are still. And I think when it comes to the Critical Raw Materials Act and to that, Canada is in a group 1 of friendly countries to help Europe to be not 100% or 90% dependent on one country.
Yeah, thank you. I think we still have time for 1 or maybe 2 questions from the audience. Is anybody there who wants to ask their questions? Yes, I see, sir, over there. Can someone...
Hi, my name's Tim Spencer. I'm involved with a exploration project in Italy and 30 years experience in mining. Europe talks a lot about mining and the need for finding and discovering critical minerals. What's been done about supporting exploration?
Who wants to take this question? Yeah, please.
Right? Yeah. So I understand you're asking if what has been done in terms of exploration in the European Union. So I think that just based on the results, there hasn't been done much. I mean, no new deposit has been found, and we always go back to old mines and projects where the remaining mineral there is probably no ore. And therefore, I think we have to change the exploration strategy. That is one thing, as explorers, we should start thinking. And again, when we go out there to find mineral deposits, as I said in my presentation, we have to keep in mind that they have to be eventually mined, and therefore, we need to establish some sort of a minimum requirement when we start spending money in exploration. Of course, the help of the institutions and the support of the governments is important, but more than that, we, as explorationists, we have to, as I said, change our strategy in order to make more discoveries. And again, Mother Nature is Mother Nature. Hopefully those new deposits contains the critical materials we need here in Europe, but that's something that we don't decide it, and we have to take whatever we find, because eventually those materials were going to be used and they're going to have some sort of application. So I think, again, I don't think that has been done enough when it comes to explore in this continent, and this is not just something that is completely out of our responsibility. We need to rethink different approach and establish different strategies. Thank you.
Marco.
Thanks. Now, you all know about the CRM Act, which has been talked about a lot in a couple of days. Now, CRM Act also regulates or puts the responsibility to each of the member states to come up with the exploration program for the future, for the next, let's say, 10 to 20 years. Now, how well will the governments actually address this? We don't know. I know that they are in preparation, and some of the programs have already been put in for the evaluation. The challenge in Europe we have that we've depleted the shallow ore deposits, and now we have to go deeper, which brings higher costs with it. And again, that what has just been said brings down the responsibility to governments, how much they will invest in actually know what's below, let's say, below 300 meters or even deeper. At least for my country, I can say we don't know basically nothing about what's below 300 meters, except where we have depleted oil fields, and that's it. So in those countries where geology is really complex, we might find quite nice surprises. Again, that will need to be financed in some way to actually make some drill holes, not only to dream about what we can retrieve in Europe. That's the first step, and then we come back to the NIMBY issue, which is next one. So thanks.
Thank you. So I think that we were running, it's 3 minutes to lunch. Many things have been said over the panel, over the different presentations. You talked a lot about challenges, but what I see is also potential. There's a lot of potentials with the technologies and innovation. I have just a last final question for every single speaker of my panel today, a wrap-up question. What will we be talking about this time next year? Or what would you like we will be talking about this time next year? How do you imagine the future? How do you imagine this conversation and things going on happening in Europe exactly in 1 year time? I will see you next year here, and what we'll be talking about. We can start maybe from Marco and then over there and then come here.
Me again, I'm talking all the time. I would love to hear a success story next year in this domain. That would be a great topic to talk about.
Slightly levering back to the last question, I think there's a need for a conversation about appetite for risk and maybe more sophisticated instruments like Canada has, for instance, and Australia has to move projects forward, where we maybe have a little bit of a habit of looking to the government here, where other people just don't bother, and they have entrepreneurial approaches to project development that do tend to move things forward more agilely than a more statist approach. So I think that would be a good topic to talk about next year.
Love it. I second that. And especially not talking about it, but actually seeing it in the field, right? It's nice to have PowerPoint presentations, but ultimately what counts is that we get the stuff out of the ground, and that would be great to see many more examples like this, and that magnesia is on the list of the critical raw materials.
Well, I guess that we're going to have a long list of wishes for the next year, based on what we have heard in the last couple of days. But just have one, that is, if we could just... for once, start looking the emperor naked and not dressed with some kind of an existent cloth. That would be a major step forward. That's, anyways, that would see coming from the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it feels like it's close to Christmas time. So for us, certainly to have 1 or 2 pilot plants running in Europe, and probably more projects labeled with the strategic label from the Commission in the next run of the critical raw material projects.
Okay, maybe not about the EU specifically, but I would expect more presentation about how AI is impacting the industry, because it's already starting to reshape very many aspects of the value chain, so I will expect something like that.
So someone mentioned hypocrisy earlier. My view is, if those of you with children want to leave a better world for your children that is not completely devastated by climate change, if you want other people not in this room to enjoy everything that we have, our phones, our ability to connect, that means all of this leads to mining as an absolutely important, vital stakeholder with actually a very positive story to tell of how you empower energy transition and digital transition. And if I can do my job right, then I would hope we can make circular economy an actual business case that mining stakeholders can see, and that's another positive story we can tell as to why mining of critical minerals for energy and digital transition is absolutely necessary. It's positive for businesses, people, and the planet. So that would be my hope.
Much of the discussion, especially if we are not talking about mining per se in Europe, but about the entire value chains, is restricted or limited by how competitive the local products can be against primarily Chinese competitors or others. So I would really value a conversation on where over the next year we can make progress and which specific technology products are ahead of the game against global competitors, which are both cost efficient, but also which one can add real value globally and in the European context.
Well, I would expect to be talking about how are we going to develop human infrastructure, like knowledge, to unlock value in European mining and to develop more projects in the future years for Europe.
Amazing, thank you. So now I'm very much looking forward to our conversation next year to see if we're really going to talk about this. Anyway, thank you very much. It's time for lunch. Please join me and give a big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.